Chapter 11, Young Man, It's Your Foreskin. After a creak, the door of the virtual cabin opened, and Roland, who was in comfortable pajamas, lurched out. He patted his face and realized that he was wide awake. He didn't feel like he had gamed for a whole night. It did make sense on second thought. His body had been resting for the last 8 hours, and only his consciousness was in the game. So, his body in reality shouldn't be tired. He observed his silver virtual cabin, which was in the shape of an egg. Honestly speaking, he found it quite shabby. It was essentially an egg-shaped bed, with a few LED indicators and 2 magnet-like items near the pillow. Nothing else was worth mentioning. There were no nutrition fluids or neural connections as described in the science fiction novels. Yet, this cabin had successfully put him in a virtual world. Also, time flowed at a different speed in the game. 1 hour in reality equaled 3 hours in the game. The game was only available from 22 to 6 o'clock the next day. The 8 hours in reality were a day in the game, which was why the game was frozen in the morning of the second day. The time was up in reality. It was a Saturday and he didn't need to go to work. Roland worked out on a treadmill for half an hour, then he took a shower and had some bread and water as breakfast. After that, he turned on the computer and opened the game's forum. As expected, the forum was exploding. In only an hour, more than 100,000 new topics had been added, and the number was still growing. Roland read some of the topics. Some of the netizens were impressed that the game was as immersive as it was claimed to be, and some found it hard to believe that Penguin Corporation, which was infamous for plagiarism, had developed such unbelievable technology. Roland had the same doubt. However, the fact remained undeniable: this was the first immersive game in the whole world. So, instead of questioning the source of Penguin Corporation's technology, he browsed on, only to laugh so hard that he was almost in tears. Many people were praising the game for a lot of aspects. Some believed that the NPCs were vivid, some complimented the beautiful environment, and some thought highly of the setting. However, one particular thread was stuck on the top, and it received as many likes as dislikes. According to this thread, players could hit on the NPCs in the game. The creator of this thread was a rarely seen bard, a variant of Warlock with high charisma and built-in language proficiency, allowing him to understand what the NPCs said. Roland found it unfair when he read this part. Why did the Warlocks only need to read the name of a spell to cast it, when mages had to connect the magic nodes? That was definitely occupational discrimination. However, as he read on patiently, he was soon amused. Taking advantage of his high charisma and language proficiency, this player hit on several young women when he joined the game. Then, he discovered, to his surprise, that he could have sex with the female NPCs in the game, which was certainly real and exhilarating. What happened next made Roland laugh. The two of them were caught by the woman's husband, and the husband surrounded the player with a dozen helpers. While the bard was a complex class with high combat abilities, he was now naked, unarmed, and his level was low. He was no match for the dozen brawny men. After he was defeated, he was pressed to the ground and circumcised by the husband with a knife. The blood was all over the ground. It was not very painful, but can you imagine the mental trauma when someone cuts your penis bit by bit with a sharp blade? I think I've been traumatized. All the replies in the thread were emojis of laughter. There are truly all kinds of players. Roland held his belly and laughed hard. Finally, he closed the thread and entered the feedback section. Naturally, there were not as many posts in the feedback section. Roland read some of them and realized that most of the suggestions did not make any sense. If the game was revised according to their wishes, it would be ruined. For example, someone proposed that the languages of all races in the game should be changed to Chinese so that the players could understand NPCs more easily. He pictured the blonde sorcerers chanting in Chinese and immediately found it unfitting. Roland read on and found some topics related to his own experience. A player had suggested that the difficulty for mages to cast a spell be lowered. All the other classes were capable of fighting, but not mages. Warriors had high strength, rogues were fast and could launch remote attacks, warlocks were natural-born sorcerers, and priests did not need to fight under the protection of warriors. All they had to do was cast healing. The poor mages, in comparison, were bad at melee battles and could not cast a spell. Their heads might even explode when they tried a spell beyond their level. The player was the chief of a guild. He wrote in his thread, "The level 2 spells, in particular, will result in head explosion whenever they fail. All the mages in my guild have had explosion experiences, some more than once. The girls are now almost traumatized. More importantly, no mages have successfully cast a spell yet. If you don't believe it, you can check the spellcaster section. Please, game designers, give us some hope." Roland felt a lot better knowing that his head was not the only one that had exploded. He left the feedback section for the spellcaster section. As he expected, the mage players were wailing there. They were complaining about how miserable and wretched they were when the magic recoiled. Head explosion was actually a neat way to die. The more appalling deaths included eyeballs popping and bleeding out. Although the pain in-game had been reduced to 1/10, it was still not a pleasant feeling. Roland read the section for a long time. Then he discovered, to his surprise, that no mages claimed that they had successfully cast a spell. Many warlocks, on the other hand, were gloating and encouraging the mages to delete their characters and become warlocks. I can't allow this. Roland found a portable disc and connected it to the virtual cabin. He picked some segments of his experiments and posted them with the 4 profiles of spells in a thread titled Roland's Experience on Inferior Fireball. Chapter 12, Good Friend. Under the gentle light from the monitor, Roland typed on his mechanical keyboard quickly. Soon, he finished his article and uploaded the videos. After he posted them, he was going to rest his fingers for a while when his phone rang. He glanced at the number on the screen and accepted the call. Without any formalities, he simply asked, "How's it going?" "Not bad. I'm already promoted to Saint Samurai," said a young man with a magnetic voice. "What about you?" "According to the forum, the future of mages doesn't look good." Roland replied, "It's fine. I've already got my feet under me." "You're good," said the young man sincerely. "You don't need to work today, do you? Let's meet at the old spot. I've called Raffle. This game is too complicated and astonishingly huge. It's hard to talk about it over the phone." "All right, I'll meet you there." Roland hung up the phone and found a t-shirt in the closet. Then he said goodbye to his parents in the living room and left on a bike. Roland was in a southern city, and it was a hot summer. The sun was scorching, although it was only morning. Roland tried to ride in the shadow of trees and avoid the sun, but he started sweating heavily very soon. The air in the city was usually humid, and there were few heavy industries within, with trees everywhere. So, Roland's hometown had great air quality and a clear sky. However, Roland felt that there was a strange smell in the air. He wondered if it was his imagination. 10 minutes later, Roland came to a cold drink bar. The official hour of opening had not arrived yet, but the door was already open. Roland secured his bike and walked in. The air conditioner was on in the cold drink bar. The moment he came in, Roland felt that he was revived from the heat. The decorations of the bar were mostly in warm yellow. He greeted the pretty woman at the counter and went straight to a booth on the second floor that had the plate of a panda on the door. Soft music was being played inside the booth. A young man was sitting on the yellow chair. He was handsome, with fair skin, dark eyes, red lips, and bright teeth. He was enjoying a bottle of Red Bull, a watermelon before him. Roland sat down on his opposite and chuckled. "Red Bull and watermelon. You're having such aphrodisiacs so early in the morning? Did you have too much sex last night?" The handsome young man was named Shuck. They were best buddies and neighbors and had been in the same school from elementary school to college. They were not brothers but closer than brothers. So, they were most direct with each other. Shuck put down the can in his hand and said helplessly, "I have no choice. Marriage is the tomb of love. Now, all the sex is compulsory. If I hadn't worked hard to feed her first, I wouldn't have been able to join the game in time." Handsome guys were always pursued by a lot of girls. Shuck was good-looking even compared to superstars. Besides, he was a decent man who didn't smoke or drink. Playing games was his only hobby. So, many girls were after him. Shuck's wife was his classmate, and naturally, Roland's classmate too, from middle school. Her name was Chen Hongdan. Of all his pursuers, she was the most beautiful and audacious. She had been pursuing Shuck since middle school. She even threatened her family so she could be sent to Shuck's class in high school. She also applied for the same college that Shuck went to and volunteered to do laundry for Shuck in college. After they graduated, they naturally got married. Shuck was the owner of this cold drink bar, but Chen Hongdan was actually running it. She loved her husband and did not want him to work hard. The panda booth was a special place reserved for him and his friends. It was never open to the public. "You're talking like married life is hard." Roland knew that Shuck's life was comfortable. The guy had an easy job. He was not earning plenty of money with his cold drink bar, but his life was definitely above average. Besides, his wife was very nice to him. Most men would envy him. According to the official announcement, Saint Samurai is one of the 3 OP classes. "How were you promoted so fast?" Shuck replied, equally puzzled. "At first, I thought it was hard. My character was a bard. I ran to the Temple of Light and prayed before the statue of the goddess with language proficiency, and then I was promoted. I found it odd, too. How does the class feel? Asked Roland curiously. Shuck picked up a piece of melon and said, I haven't fought anyone yet, but the privileges are quite good. People in the Temple of Light were shocked when I became a Saint Samurai. They offered me weapons and armors and 20 gold coins, claiming that they would give me money regularly every month. Roland sighed helplessly. Their experiences were too different. He had worked hard yet couldn't really cast one complete spell, and his friend was already making money. Most upsetting of all, Shuck didn't really do anything. How lucky was he? While Roland was bummed out, the booth opened, and two young men, one fat and the other slim, came in. They wiped their sweat and sat on the long chair without greeting Roland and Shuck. They didn't start talking until they had some watermelon. Today is too hot. I feel that my fat is being squeezed out. It was the fatty, who was named Raffle, who said this. He was not too tall and had an amusingly round face. It's because you're too fat. I don't sweat as much at all. The slim guy replied to him. He was about 1.83 meters tall. Because he was too slim, he looked like a pole. He was called Brazil, because he loved watching the Brazilian national team play football and wore their uniform all the time. He went by the same name in the game. Roland looked out and asked, where are Li Lin and Husseret? Shuck waved his hand and said, they're working and won't be free until nighttime. Let's talk first. Tell me your locations in the game. Raffle and Brazil both shook their heads, because they could not speak the local language. Raffle was a shield warrior, and Brazil was an archer. Neither of them could cast a spell, so they did not know what the NPCs talked about. All they knew was that they were in different towns. Shuck said, I am in a city named Isness. I don't know its specific location yet, but it should be a fairly large city with its scale. Roland told his friends his location, Red Mountain Town. Then he remarked, this game is outrageously huge. It seems that we are scattered. So, we might as well work on our own for now and make other plans later when we're more familiar with the game. Shuck nodded and said, that's all we can do for now. Chapter 13, Unexpected Earnings. The four of them chit-chat in the cold drink bar for 3 hours and dispersed at noon. Roland rode his bike back home against the scorching sun in the middle of the day. The first thing he did after he came home was set the temperature of the air conditioner to minimum and let the cold wind blow at him. After he cooled down, Roland turned on his computer and logged in on the forum again, only to discover that his personal mailbox was filled with private messages. Roland was puzzled to see the ocean of notifications. Taking a deep breath, he read them more carefully. Most of them were tipping notifications. At first he thought it was a system error, but after checking a few messages, he discovered that he had indeed been tipped, some with 1 forum coin and some with dozens. On this forum, the forum coin equaled to money in reality. Every forum coin was about $1. All the tips were from the same source, Roland's experience on Inferior Fireball, which he posted not long ago. He reopened the Spellcaster section and saw that his thread was stickied, highlighted, and recommended. He clicked the thread, and everybody was praising him. I admire nobody but the author of this post. These 2 forum coins are my gratitude. Analyzing spells with mathematical models is truly genius. I've memorized your self-detonation nodes in your last attempt and will try it tonight. Here are 5 forum coins. Inferior Fireball turns into a self-destructing bomb. You're definitely a promising bomber. I don't have much money, but here are 2 forum coins to show my support. There were a lot of similar praises. The tips ranged from 1 to 20. Of course, most people did not tip and were only here for fun. Some warlocks came in and tried to derail the topic, but their sarcastic remarks did not raise much attention and were soon drowned by the praises. Roland returned to the account center. He held his forehead after a quick glance, because he had more than 50,000 forum coins and the number was growing. Exchanging those coins into real cash, he would earn about $50,000 even with the commission charge. That was his salary for a whole year, and he had spent it on the game cabin. Little did he expect that he could earn the money for the game cabin back by posting his experience in the game. It meant that thousands of people had tipped him on the forum. Those who could afford a game cabin were generally not poor. After all, the game cabin, which cost $50,000, was not cheap. Roland was happy to make some money, but he had a lot of complicated feelings after the incident. He was not a professional player, and he never thought to make a living by playing games. He exchanged the forum coins and soon received the money. Reading the text message that informed him of the payment of $50,000, Roland chuckled and had lunch downstairs. Then, he rode his bike for a while, and when he was back, he was calm again. The excitement of his bonus was gone. He played other games for a while, but after experiencing the immersive world, he had lost interest in other games. Even his favorite games couldn't appeal to him right now. Time had never moved more slowly for him. Finally, it was around 21:45. He put on his pajamas and crawled into the game cabin. The cabin was automatically closed, and a green light glimmered before his eyes. He closed his eyes and soon fell asleep. When he was awake again, he found himself back in the game. The world was still monochrome, and Faucon was still rising next to him. Roland could not move either. He waited patiently. Soon, the world was colorful again, and Faucon stood up. He had no idea that Roland had left this world once. Hunched, he slowly turned around and said to Roland, "You can't be familiarized with magic overnight. I suggest you find a job in the town and save some money first. By the time you grasp the spells, you will have saved enough money for you to make other plans." Roland realized that it did make sense, but he shook his head after thinking for a while. "I can't speak your language yet. I don't think I can find a job, can I?" "I got a job for you," said Faucon with a smile. "There's a mine at the back of the mountain. All you need to do is dig for minerals. No conversation is needed. There's free food, and the pay is decent." Mining was indeed a good way to grow rich in other games, but it was hard to say in this one. However, since Roland did not really have a choice, he eventually nodded and said, "Thank you, but I'm afraid that I don't have enough strength. Mining is hard labor, after all. Professionals are far stronger than regular people." Faucon smiled. "Even the spellcasters are much better than regular men in terms of body build. I could knock down a couple of brawny men barehandedly when I was young." Roland was not convinced, but he could tell that he was a lot stronger in this game than he was in reality, although he was merely a spellcaster. Faucon led Roland to the town. When they passed the trail next to the lake, a lot of villagers greeted Faucon, and Faucon greeted back politely. Roland could tell that Faucon was very popular here. 10 minutes later, Faucon brought Roland to the foot of a hill to the west of the lake. There was a cave here, with turquoise stones heaped outside. Further away lay a big stone house that was probably a warehouse. A dark middle-aged man was taking a nap on a desk outside of the warehouse. Faucon walked over and tapped the old wooden desk. The middle-aged man was immediately woken up. Seeing that it was Faucon, he said fawningly, "Master Faucon, what has brought you here?" "Galen, I've brought a worker for you." Faucon patted Roland's back and said, "He's a rookie, but I'm sure he won't disappoint you." The middle-aged named Galen sized up Roland for a while and hesitated. "Master, this youngster seems too soft and civilized for heavy-duty work." Faucon sniffed and mocked, "You think he'll work here for long? Also, you don't know who he is? You haven't been to the town recently, have you?" Red Mountain Town was not a large place. Most news spread throughout the town very quickly. It was rather strange that Galen did not know of Roland. The middle-aged shook his head. "I came from Roundwood Town this morning. It was exhausting and I've been napping since. I overheard that something happened in the town, but I don't know the details." Chapter 14, Purity 5. Galen was the richest guy in the town for a simple reason: his father was the mayor of the town, and he owned a mine. While the minerals were not very profitable, they still made Galen's life comfortable. Galen eyed Roland up and down. In the end, for Faucon's sake, he said, "All right, since Master Faucon has recommended you, I'll take you on. However, I'm a fair man. I'll give him money according to the minerals he digs without any special privilege. How does it sound?" Faucon chuckled and said, "No problem." Then, he patted Roland's shoulder and left slowly. Galen opened the gate of the stone house, and the stench of rocks was unleashed. Different minerals had been piled up inside the warehouse. Galen fetched a hoe and a basket from inside and tossed them to Roland. He said, "These are your tools. You can start working." "Right, what's your name?" "I need to register it." Galen picked up a quill and opened a book from his drawer carefully. "Speak, and tell me your age, too." "Roland, 17. Roland was 24 in reality, but his game character was set to be 17, between a teenager and an adult. So, he could only give such information. After all, he looked too young to be 24, and Galen wouldn't have been convinced if he said so. Galen wrote down his name in the book. Roland stole a glimpse at it and discovered that the words in this world were pictograms. The words were not straight. There was no telling whether it was the standard format or Galen's personal style. In the end, Galen waved at Roland, and Roland strode into the cave with the hoe and the basket. The cave was rather huge, which was understandable because fresh air was needed in the mines. An oil lamp was established every dozen meters on the way. The wall was wet, and Roland could feel water on it. Roland dragged the basket forward. There were pit holes and pebbles everywhere on the way. After several minutes, he finally heard noises up ahead. Soon, he saw several people working hard at the end of the cave in different directions. This was the real mine. It was a rather spacious place. The dome was a dozen meters high, and there were about 30 meters from the left end to the right end. The place was rather dim despite the lamps hanging on the wall. Roland jumped off from the platform. Someone noticed the noise but soon focused on their mining. Time was money for the miners. Observing the environment carefully, Roland came to an unoccupied corner and watched other miners work. Then, he copied them. Mining and sweating for an entire day, and copper of purity 5 is all I can find. To the soundtrack of Cling Clinklings, Roland somehow remembered the poem. When MMORPG games were popular, he was only a 10-year-old child. He saved his breakfast money for a whole month to buy the monthly card for a game. Then, he mined 2 hours every day and paid for the game with the coins he earned in the game in order to play on. His deepest impression on the first MMORPG game was mining, and he was mining again in the first immersive game in the world. He wondered if he was destined to be a miner. Mining was an arduous task, but players, including spellcasters like Roland, had much better body builds than regular people did. When he started to work, his hoe was always hitting the hard rocks or getting stuck in the crevices, but half an hour later, Roland felt that he was getting the hang of it. A yellow and white rock was dug out. Roland picked it up and observed it for a moment. Then, he shook his head, threw it away, and worked on. Before, when Galen opened the warehouse, he had snapped the minerals in the warehouse with the photo function of the system, which allowed him to compare the rocks he dug out to the existing ones to evaluate their value. Of course, the comparison couldn't be accurate, but it was much better than random guesses. After another hour, the other miners sat down and rested, but Roland kept working. Those miners gathered and pointed at him. There was even vague laughter. They must be mocking Roland because they thought that Roland couldn't persist much longer. Roland ignored them and carried on. He had to keep trying until he felt exhausted. Those miners rested for a while and went back to work. An hour later, they were too tired to work on again, yet Roland was still waving his hoe. This time, they didn't tease Roland and just gazed at him in silence. After resting for a while, they continued digging, but when they gathered again and rested an hour later, Roland was still waving his hoe. The miners stared at the thin young man in disbelief. Someone couldn't hold back anymore and approached Roland. He looked at the rocks in Roland's basket and the dent on the wall that Roland had just created with complicated feelings. Roland pried a stone off the wall and threw it back into the basket. He smiled at the miner who approached him and left the mine with the heavy basket. At this moment, language proficiency was already over. It was impossible for him to communicate with others. The miners watched him leave. Looking at their baskets that were still half empty, they all lost motivation to work. Roland left the cave with the basket. It took him quite a while to become used to the dazzling sunlight outside. In the end, he dragged the basket to Galen and heaved it onto Galen's desk. The basket was so heavy that the desk almost collapsed. Galen was greatly surprised and woke up from his dream. He exclaimed after he saw the basket and Roland behind it. However, Roland couldn't understand him now. After Galen made a long speech, he could only shrug helplessly. Sorry, language proficiency is over. Galen was stunned, because he couldn't understand Roland either. However, as a merchant who traveled a lot, he guessed what had happened. There were more things that he wanted to say, but he can only shut up now. He moved the basket down to the ground and screamed the rocks in the basket. The worthless ones were thrown away, and the valuable ones were divided into 3 heaps according to their quality. In the end, he counted them and put 28 coins on the desk. Roland took the coins and left without saying anything. Chapter 15, Quest? It was already noon. Everything seemed to be melting under the scorching sun. Trees and houses further down the road were slightly distorted by the hot air. Roland returned to the temple on the mountain along the trail. He saw that Falcon was treating a plump woman. Surrounded by a white pillar of light, the woman laughed in relief a few seconds later and soon left quickly. After it was done, Falcon cast language proficiency at Roland before he asked, "How much have you earned?" 28 coppers. Roland took out a coin from his pocket and asked, "This is copper, right?" With his hands on his back, Falcon approached him and smiled. "You earned more than I expected. I thought you could make no more than 10 coppers as a beginner. 28 coppers are enough to keep you full for several days." Roland smiled but did not explain. He said, "Where can I have food in town? I'm a little bit hungry." "Take a right turn down the mountain and walk along the trail. You'll find a tavern on your right after you pass a pier. The food in the tavern is abundant and cheap, but of course, I wouldn't say it's delicious. I don't know if it agrees with you." Any food agrees with me right now. Roland shrugged and left the temple after thanking Faucon. According to Faucon's instructions, Roland found the tavern under the scorching sun. There were 3 pictograms on the door of the tavern. Language proficiency could only influence the mind and allow people to talk with each other. It could not enable the recipients to understand written words. The tavern was not very large, with a coverage of no more than 200 square meters. The door was a short wooden one, making it possible to see what was going on inside from outside. There were several old but clean round tables, surrounded by round chairs. The fragrance of bread and the smell of sour alcohol spread everywhere. Roland also saw several men chugging big grey cups and clamoring as if they were drunk. Roland pushed the door and walked in. The waitress, who had been standing at the counter, immediately called earnestly, "Sir, welcome to Lakeview Tavern. What would you like to order?" So, the 3 words on the door meant Lakeview Tavern. While the waitress gazed at him in surprise, Roland backed off to the door and took a photo of the 4 pictograms, before he put a note of their meaning on the photo. Although language proficiency could not teach him a language instantly, he was able to learn the language if he used the spell in a roundabout way. Also, the spell seemed applicable to all languages, which made it quite useful. Roland was rather happy to realize the trick. He entered the tavern again, only to notice that the waitress was eyeing him strangely. He knew that his odd behavior just now must have surprised her. "Do you have anything cheap and delicious?" Roland sat on a chair before the counter and asked with a smile, "Don't recommend anything too expensive. I don't have a lot of money." The waitress was not exactly beautiful, but she was young and lovely, with freckles on the sides of her nose. Her eyes were big and blue, and her smile was sweet and comforting. "I recommend honey bread." The waitress was also wearing linen clothes, except that hers were cleaner and more fashionable. "I know you are the hero who saved 3 kids. I would have sold honey bread to you at half price if I were the owner of this tavern." "A piece of honey bread it is, then. All right, please wait a moment." The waitress went to the kitchen and soon returned with a plate that had a piece of long bread covered in golden honey. "This is the bread you ordered. 2 coppers. The honey bread looked pretty huge. 2 coppers was a fair price, at least for Roland. He handed over 2 coppers. Then, the waitress stared at his hands in a strange way. Roland looked at his own hands, only to discover a couple of huge, appalling blisters there. He pressed them but felt no pain, although they seemed scary. It must be because the feeling of pain had been reduced to 1/10. It was the result of mining, but it didn't matter since it was not too painful. He could continue digging and making money tomorrow morning. Roland had a bite of the bread. Then, his expression changed subtly. The honey was good, and the bread was also good, but the honey bread was not exactly tasteful. It was too hard and even had an inexplicable smell. No wonder Faucon said that the food in this tavern might not agree with him. The waitress could tell what was going on from his subtle expression. She smiled. "It's not delicious? But our bread is the best in this town, although it may be shabby for big shots like you." "Big shots? He's just a brat." One of the few men who were drinking turned around and shouted, flushing, "He has no advantages except for his pretty face. It was only because of luck that he saved those kids. I could have done the same. Why do you think so highly of him?" Roland knew that he was probably famous in the town, but he did not know that he was very famous. Children were the future of a family, a town, and a country. Offspring always mattered most in every place. Saving a child could earn more gratitude than saving an adult on many occasions. Of course, while some people admired heroes and extraordinary figures, some people did not see eye to eye with them. Most of the time, their hostility boiled down to one simple reason: jealousy. Roland looked at the 3 drunkards, only to discover that there was nothing worth mentioning about them. They were all middle-aged men without any attractive qualities. Have I triggered a certain quest? Roland thought for a moment. In the spirit of experimentation, he said provocatively, "Cut the crap. Do you want to fight outside?" The few men tossed their cups to the floor, splashing bright yellow ale everywhere. While the waitress screamed, they flipped over the table and walked toward Roland aggressively. Chapter 16, Upgraded. The alcoholics and Roland left the tavern. The waitress peeped from the tavern, but she dared not go out and stop them. She heard noises and screams, and soon, Roland returned to the tavern to finish the remaining bread with dark circles around his eyes. The waitress knew that Roland must have won, but she still chuckled at Roland's new look. Roland was slightly bummed. He did not receive a system notification telling him that he had claimed or accomplished a quest. It meant that the fight was not part of a quest. He felt that the test was not worth it. Although he did defeat a few drunkards, his own face was punched several times. It was not very painful, but the bruises on his face made him look rather hilarious. Roland finished the honey bread and paid another copper for a cup of honey juice. Then, burping in satisfaction, he reached the east side of the lake, walking along the trail next to the lake. This place was at the foot of the mountain and would be overshadowed by the mountain in the afternoon. Due to the cold and lack of sunlight, no villagers had built their houses here. So the place was empty. Roland found it a perfect place to practice magic. He redrew the profiles of the nodes of inferior fireball on the sand, before he analyzed and reversely inferred them. The mathematical model was obviously helpful right now. He could have results as long as there was enough data. Math was a compulsory class in college. Roland was not adept at it, but he had passed it anyway. He calculated for a long time and found 3 excellent roots of nodes, which featured speed, power, and distance respectively while guaranteeing the stability of the spell. After he tested the 3 node roots, surprisingly, he received a system notification. He had leveled up. No glittering special effects, and no pleasant background music. He had leveled up simply and unexpectedly as that. Roland also noticed that the icon of inferior fireball on Magic Book in the system now had a bright gold background inversed behind it. Studying a spell could increase the experience of the game character? That could be the only explanation. Such a way of leveling up was indeed fit for scholar-type classes such as mages. Roland found the game more and more interesting. The system only offered simple notifications. There were no hints of quests, mini-maps, or character profiles. Players could only see the initial attributes of their characters when the characters were built. There were no health bars or names above the NPCs' heads, either. Everything felt real. After the level up, Roland felt that he was slightly stronger and more flexible. But more importantly, he could sense the flow of magic in his body more clearly. He had to cast spells consecutively to sense magic previously, but right now, he could clearly sense a comforting matter in the air, which was being absorbed into his body slowly. That must be the elements of magic power. What really amazed Roland was another system notification. Dear player, you have reached level 1 and become an official professional. The backpack function of the system has been activated. You can use this function by reading Backpack in your heart. Please find out the effects of this function on your own. Have fun. So, the system offered a backpack. Roland clapped his hands in great delight. It was the first time he had played an immersive game, but anybody with common sense about games should know how convenient it would be to have a backpack that did not need to be carried in such a lifelike game. Roland soon opened the backpack according to the instructions. A translucent cubic space was unfolded before his eyes. Though it was right next to him, Roland knew that it was a projection that only he could see. The storage of this backpack was 8 cubic meters. It's so huge? Roland threw some stones and sand into the backpack, before he added twigs and water. Soon, he reached a useful conclusion. Gravity did not exist in the backpack, which made it easier to heap items. After all, nothing would collapse if there was no gravity. As to whether or not the backpack could preserve food, and for how long? That required more tests to figure out. Roland looked around. Then, he chanted the magic coordinates very quickly. X23. Z88. It was the optimal route of nodes for inferior fireball that Roland had found out through mathematical modeling. Comprehensively speaking, it had the best performance in terms of speed, power, distance, and stability. The bright blue fireball the size of a fist dashed into the water in the lake. A few bubbles immediately popped up. Soon, 3 little fish floated to the surface. Roland lifted his robe and entered the water. He threw the 3 silver fish into his backpack. Those fish were stunned but still alive, but they struggled and stopped moving after they were thrown into the backpack. They were obviously dead. The backpack could not keep living creatures. Roland recorded it on his memo pad. He couldn't test the preservation abilities of the backpack for now, but he was sure that he could find out in a day or two. Now that he was versed in inferior fireball, his level had increased, and he even got an unexpected backpack. Roland focused his attention on another level 1 spell, Hand of Magic. It was a control spell without much damage. According to its description, the spell could form an invisible hand with magic to grab objects. The size of the hand, the gripping power, and the reaching distance were related to the level of the mage, the connection of nodes, and the amount of magic power. Then, there were consecutive failures again. However, perhaps because he had upgraded and had a better perception of magic, he did not feel as tired and painful as he did when inferior fireball failed. Therefore, Roland was soon able to draw the profiles of the nodes of Hand of Magic. It was much faster than when he analyzed inferior fireball. Then, he bought more bread at Lakeview Tavern, partly as supper and partly as a nighttime snack, and tossed it into his backpack in the evening. He also bought a lamp in the tavern. After that, he spent the whole night establishing a mathematical model for Hand of Magic. Finally, when it was dawn, Roland found out the optimal route of nodes for Hand of Magic 10 minutes before the game paused again. Hand of Magic on the magic book was now versed, but Roland's level did not increase this time. He estimated that it was because the experience required for the next level up had increased, so grasping another spell was not enough for him to level up again. Chapter 17, New Spell. Roland bought a piece of freshly made honey bread in Lakeview Tavern. He was about to eat it when the game world paused and turned monochrome. 24 hours had flown away so quickly. Roland sighed and exited the game. It had been years since he was so addicted to a game. Most games on the market today were too similar. He grew bored of every new game after playing it for several days, even though they were all AAA games, because he always felt that he had somehow played them before. However, World of Phelan was different. It was the first immersive MMORPG worldwide. By casting their consciousness away from reality, the players were able to have adventures in an alternate world under a different identity. A world so broad that one might not be able to see the whole of it in their entire life, billions of lifelike NPCs, and 100 countries of different races. Roland was excited by the thought of it. He felt lucky that he made up his mind to buy a game cabin. There were only 500,000 of them worldwide. People who missed the purchase window had to wait for a long time before Penguin Corporation released the next batch. After he exited the game, Roland worked out on a treadmill for half an hour as usual. He then had breakfast and checked the forum again. As he expected, many people were encouraging Penguin Corporation to sell the next batch of virtual cabins. Some were even offering to pay 10,000 more bucks to buy a second-hand virtual cabin. After reading a few random threads, Roland went to the Spellcaster section and posted the profiles of Hand of Magic and several interesting nodes. He also announced that players would receive a backpack when they leveled up. After that, he browsed through other threads. He never thought that he was the smartest player in the game. After all, many people knew mathematical models. It was just that a lot of mages, who were highly intelligent in reality, never thought about that before. Now that Roland had opened a door for them, they could certainly walk through it. As Roland had expected, new threads on spells appeared in the section. One particular thread drew his interest. As long as you remember the nodes of a spell and successfully cast it once, you will be able to learn it. I'm a mage specializing in enchantment, and I only know hypnosis, animal control, and mind influence. I learned the chart of nodes for Inferior Fireball on the forum by heart. After dozens of failures, I successfully cast Inferior Fireball, and the icon of Inferior Fireball appeared in my magic book. It's evident that spells can be learned. I've managed to record the nodes of hypnosis and posted them here for you. In the end, respect to Roland the Pioneer. The Pioneer. Roland felt rather embarrassed. He tipped the female player named Serena 10 forum coins, before he copied the 4 charts of hypnosis down. He then copied the charts provided by another 3 mage players on the forum. Of course, he did not forget to tip them 10 forum coins each. Now, he had 4 new charts of magic nodes. All of them were level 1 spells, namely Hypnosis, Strengthening, Ice Ring, and Arcane Bullet. Roland copied the profiles of the 4 spells into his game cabin with a flash disk. Then, he realized that his new post had received thousands of bucks worth in tips. Looking at his forum coins, he had never thought that making money could be so easy. After that, he left home on a bike and hung around with his friends in the cold drink bar. When the night came, he crawled into the virtual cabin again and entered the game. In the game world in the following days, Roland mined in the morning and studied new spells with the profiles of spells he obtained from the forum in the afternoon and at night. It was not until he had real practice that Roland learned how difficult it was to pick up a new spell. Unlike the existing spells in the magic book, which would automatically generate a 3D graph of the magic nodes in his consciousness, the new spells offered nothing. Roland had to construct a space of magic nodes with his magic power on his own, before he correctly filled the magic nodes in with his mind. Constructing the models of magic nodes with the charts he copied alone had taken Roland a lot of time. The chart of every spell required more than 10 hours and a dozen failures. It was not until he learned the new spells that their icons would appear in the magic book. Then, to be versed in the new spells, Roland still had to test and infer the effects of the magic nodes. After several days, 4 bright gold icons appeared in Roland's magic book. After grasping the 4 spells, Roland reached level 2, but he was not very happy, because he realized that there would be fewer and fewer mages in the future. Life for a mage was too hard. Learning a new spell required a good sense of space, understanding of math and logic, and tremendous patience. Roland knew that a lot of people in the game must be smarter than him, but not all of them were mages. After all, there were many classes in this game, and different people had different preferences. There must be a lot of mages who were weaker than him in terms of comprehensive abilities. They would run out of patience if it took days or even weeks for them to learn a spell. Some of them might not be able to learn new spells at all due to lack of spatial awareness or logical thinking. Even if they managed to grasp level 1 spells, there were still spells of higher levels and difficulties. Would they have the patience to learn such spells? When they noticed that warlocks and priests could wield powerful spells with a simple chant without having to memorize it, and that new spells automatically appeared when their levels increased, the mages would be even more dissatisfied and would even complain. Then, they would demand the game producers reduce the difficulty of mages on the forum. However, Roland did not think that their attempt would work. After another day in the game, when Roland left the game and opened the forum, he realized that the spellcaster section was indeed a mess. Many mages had posted that if the game producers did not change the setting and lower the difficulty for mages to learn spells, they would delete their characters and ask for a refund. Roland sighed. Things had happened exactly as he expected. It remained to be seen how the game producers would handle it. Chapter 18, Go Away If You Don't Want to Play. The official announcement was released at noon. It was elaborate and written in a friendly tone, but it could be summarized into one short sentence: go away if you don't want to play, and we will give you a full refund for your virtual cabin. Considering that second-hand virtual cabins were already $20,000 more expensive than the originals on the market, only an idiot would have asked for a refund. The game producer's announcement indicated their confidence and pride. They had every reason to be proud after having developed such a game, or at least Roland thought so. He could tell that the game was based on Dungeons and Dragons. He did not know much about the rules of Dungeons and Dragons, but he was aware that mages truly had to learn spells on their own under such rules. The game producers had only represented the rule in their game. Besides, according to the setting, mages were supposed to be a rare class. Roland estimated that the game producers were using such a strategy to limit the number of mages and push them to become warlocks, priests, or other melee classes. If that was the case, the game producers had indeed put a lot of thought into it. After all, mages were a powerful class in all fantasy games. That was why they were called master mages. If there were too many players of an OP class, the balance of the game would definitely be affected. Significantly increasing the difficulty of the class was not a bad way to limit its population. After all, most players agreed that the more difficult a class was and the more resources it required, the more powerful it would be in the future. But of course, after the game producers gave such a reply, there would certainly be a storm of criticism on the internet. Their competitors would certainly take advantage of the chance to smear the game. A lot of haters would emerge in every topic that involved this game. The whole internet would be a mess. After all, World of Phelan, as the first immersive game worldwide, had been under the spotlight on the internet since it was launched. The sales of the first batch of virtual cabins did not go well at the beginning. After all, Penguin Corporation was notorious for its history of counterfeits. People did not believe that it had developed an immersive game. Could such a company achieve something that even the leading game companies failed to? With such thoughts, many people mocked Penguin Corporation on the internet, at home and abroad. The first 500,000 virtual cabins were gradually sold over a period of half a year. Roland did not believe that Penguin Corporation had truly developed an immersive game. However, the MMORPGs he had played since childhood were all made by Penguin Corporation. Penguin Corporation had given him a happy childhood. For that, Roland decided to buy a virtual cabin. After all, Penguin Corporation was a big company. Even if it was not a real immersive game, it should be something close, or Penguin Corporation wouldn't have promoted it so hard. Nobody expected that the game was as immersive as it claimed to be. As the first immersive game worldwide, it was at the cutting edge of this era. However unsatisfied the players were, they wouldn't give up the chance to play it. The players who thought that Mage was too difficult a class might complain and refrain from playing the game for a few days, but it was hardly unlikely that they would return or sell the virtual cabins. Otherwise, the price of second-hand virtual cabins wouldn't have increased by $20,000. Roland turned off the forum and played a few games that he liked in the past, only to discover that he couldn't enjoy them. He worked out on the treadmill for half an hour and biked on the street. He somehow felt that enjoying the scenery on the street was more fun than playing regular games in his room. Late at night, when he was about to enter the game, it suddenly occurred to him that he hadn't enjoyed regular video games for days. Could this immersive game cure computer addiction? Thinking about that, Roland entered the game again. Roland did not mine again. He had saved 2 silver coins. 100 coppers could be exchanged for 1 silver coin. He was now wealthier than half the people in town. He was not tired of mining. After all, nobody could have too much money. He merely felt that, since he was level 2, he'd better test his combat ability, and the giant spiders were the best targets. He came to the temple, and Falcon happened to be there. So, he asked for language proficiency, then returned to the town and bought a longsword from the blacksmith. Although it was odd for a mage to use a longsword, he hadn't learned any spells for self-defense yet. Should a spider approach him, a longsword might prove of use. Then, he bought some herbs that could stop bleeding from the grocery store. After putting everything in his backpack, he crossed the bridge and walked out of town. On the bridge at the entrance of the town, he saw Falcon. The wind on the lake was cool and gentle. The hunched, white-haired old man put on a kind smile when he saw Roland. "Falcon, why are you here? You're not guiding the believers at the temple?" "Just now, Jack ran to me from the blacksmith's shop and told me that you bought a longsword, so I came here to wait for you." Roland noticed the sweat on Falcon's forehead. The old man was also slowly panting with his hands behind his back. "I'm planning to test my spells. Practice is of little use. Spells can only be measured in a real battle." "You're going to fight the giant spiders?" asked Falcon. Roland nodded. "You can resurrect. For the likes of you, battle is just entertainment, but dying too many times can't be good." Falcon removed his hands from his back. He was holding a straight stick which had a small sapphire at the end. "This is the staff I used when I was young. You can take it." Any experienced player knew how expensive magical items could be. Besides, having saved a lot of money through mining over the past days, Roland knew the astonishing purchase power of money in this game world. Honey bread was sold at only 2 coppers, but honey was actually a luxurious sweet. Few villagers could afford honey. Besides, 1 large barrel of ale, which was enough to fill the stomachs of several adults, cost only 2 coppers, too. 1 copper could buy 2 kilograms of raw rice, 1 kilogram of river fish, and several kilograms of regular fruits in season. Roland had meals in Lakeview Tavern most of the time in the past days. He overheard the bragging of the customers there now and then when language proficiency was effective on him. He remembered one particular remark clearly. Even the cheapest magical item would cost more than 10 silver coins. Chapter 19, The Romance in Every Man's Heart. On the village road, Roland looked at the magic staff in his hand. Magical items were very expensive, but Falcon still gave him the staff. Was it a reward when his intimacy with the NPC surpassed a certain threshold, a prerequisite of a certain quest, or simply a choice that Falcon had made as a human being? Roland's puzzlement was quite understandable. After all, he was now in a game. According to common sense, since he was in a game, the item should be related to a quest. Yet, Roland felt that it was not so simple. Both Falcon and other people in the village impressed him as living souls with their own emotions, instead of NPCs. Although they were merely artificial intelligence according to the promotion of the game, Roland did not feel that they were any different from real people. Was he really in an immersive game? Or was it a real world with human beings in the flesh? Those people even had their own languages, customs, and history. Could a game team have come up with so many things? Roland found it unlikely. If they were capable of that, they could have been hired by think tanks to infer the history and future of the whole world. It was extremely sophisticated stuff. Yet, the window of the system popping up before his eyes convinced him that he was only in a game. Name, Mini Sapphire Magic Staff, excellent. Attributes, Casting Concentration +2, Magic Power Regeneration +1. Introduction, a rather common staff, but can be used for a lifetime if maintained properly. Then, he looked at his own body, and another translucent window popped up. Name, White Magic Robe, excellent. Attributes, Magic Power Regeneration +2. Introduction, an unattractive long robe, which is likely the very first gear for apprentices. Roland sighed. He did not know how other players viewed the NPCs in the game, but as for himself, he could not consider the human-like NPCs as experience for him to level up as he did in other games. However, it was not a problem for him to kill the bizarre wildlife. The maple forest was right up ahead. Roland looked at his staff and his long sword. Taking a deep breath, he walked into the forest slowly. As he pressed deeper and deeper, the woods became dimmer and dimmer. The quiet here was occasionally interrupted by the chirping of birds from unknown corners. Roland stepped on a thick carpet of rotten leaves, which crackled under his feet. He smelled a strange smell of fermentation. Despite knowing that he would be resurrected if he died, Roland inevitably felt scared in such an environment. He walked forward prudently and stayed on full alert. Even the tiniest noise would make his heart palpitate. He looked at the sources of the noises, and they were mostly caused by uncanny creatures. This special feeling of fear and anticipation reminded him of Resident Evil 2, which he played when he was 7. It was both thrilling and enjoyable. After another 3 minutes, Roland noticed white, broken spiderwebs at the bottom of the trees around him. He also heard the rattling sounds from ahead, as if someone was churning leaves with sticks. It must be the giant spiders. Roland squatted and took a soft breath. A giant, crimson spider emerged in the darkness slowly. The spider did not seem to notice him, but Roland's heart was racing as the spider approached. He remembered a famous line he read on the internet. Hesitation meant failure. A lion always tried its best even though it was only catching a hare. Concentrating all his magic power, Roland launched a big blue fireball the size of a basin. After shooting it out, Roland immediately ran back and crouched. The fireball grew larger in size as it flew on. Soon, it reached the giant spider. Most animals were scared of fire, and the giant spiders were no exception. The fireball collapsed rapidly at first, before it exploded at an extremely high speed. The sound and flare of the explosion suggested that a bomb had just been detonated. Before the giant spider realized what was going on, it had been consumed by the furious flames. Then, fire and smoke rose like a tiny mushroom. Even though he was outside of the range of the explosion, Roland was flung away by an enormous blast. He was lifted with a pile of dry leaves and fell to the ground. Then, hot air brushed past his head. Thankfully, the leaves were thick enough to prevent him from being hurt. Then, he struggled back to his feet, only to be rendered speechless by what he had caused. Before him was a gigantic pit, with dark red magma flowing at the bottom. The trees nearby were burning and cracking. A stretch of land at least half the size of a football field had been razed to the ground by the explosion. Many trees leaned away in radial circles. Within the blast radius, nothing but a few tree trunks that had been reduced to charcoal could be seen. Such power. Roland collapsed on the ground. His magic power had been used up. The power of the fireball was much greater than back when he was in Red Mountain Town. It was probably because his level had improved, and because the staff had enhanced his power. In any case, the power of the spell was beyond Roland's imagination. It was hardly possible for a melee class to do the same at the beginning phase of the game. He didn't think warlocks could achieve this, either. It was said that the power to cast a spell for a warlock was fixed or set to a certain ratio that could not be changed. It meant that, if compared to cars, warlocks would be the at ones, and the mages would be the MT ones. As everyone knew, the best cars for racing were all MT ones. Roland moved his body further away from the site of the explosion. He did not have much strength left. Thankfully, it was rather damp in the forest, and the fire did not spread out but started dying out. Sitting still, he enjoyed the dreadful scene that he caused in fascination and satisfaction. It was truly exhilarating to possess such a destructive power. What couldn't be done in reality could be achieved in the game. In this world that was almost entirely vivid, he could do things that he couldn't imagine in the past. The mage dream he had when he was a little kid was now fulfilled. Roland chuckled with ambitiousness and determination that he hadn't felt in years. A fantasy world of swords and magic was always the greatest romance in every boy's heart. Chapter 20, A New Guy Joins. After the mountain fire completely died out, Roland shook the leaves and ash off his body, then walked back to Red Mountain Town. He was very slow, because he was out of magic power. The regeneration effect provided by his equipment was not very obvious. Without magic power, he seemed much weaker. When he returned to the bridge at the entrance of the village, he was greeted by Faucon as well as a bunch of villagers. Seeing that he was back, the villagers hailed him and asked if he was fine. Faucon reached him and cast language proficiency at him. Then he said with a smile, "It was quite a commotion that you caused." Roland turned around, only to discover a black spot on the green hill in the distance. It was as eye-catching as a bald spot on a beautiful girl's head. Roland shrugged and smiled awkwardly. How did it turn out? The other villagers looked at him hopefully. Everybody in Red Mountain Town loathed the giant spiders and hoped that someone could kill them. It was my first battle. I was too nervous and inexperienced, and I used too much strength, said Roland in embarrassment. I only killed one giant spider. After a brief silence, the villagers cheered. They hated the spider's guts, but there was little they could do. A few friendly villagers approached Roland and patted Roland's shoulder, inviting him to visit their houses. Roland declined their offers politely, knowing that it was only their gesture of kindness. The villagers dispersed, and Faucon and Roland were left alone on the bridge. The sun was setting at this moment. When the crimson sun was reflected in the lake and the waves surged, the lake seemed to be burning. It was rather beautiful. Looking at him, Faucon suddenly said, "You seem to have changed." Is it so obvious? Roland was slightly surprised. He leaned on the rail and said slowly while gazing at the hills in the distance, "I just remembered my dream, or rather, what I looked forward to in the past. I thought it was an ungrounded fantasy that had been broken by reality. However, it was revived and occurred to me all over again. Faucon noticed a strange light in Roland's eyes, barely visible but which gave off a feeling of brightness. Once upon a time, Faucon had such light in his own eyes, too. So, have you changed your plans? Asked Faucon. Roland shook his head. No. I'm still going to travel and roam around. Roland's tone was rather unfathomable thanks to the breeze from the lake. Faucon was slightly stunned. Roland's answer was the same, except that he said it with a gentler tone this time. Yet, Faucon heard determination in it. Previously, Roland's answer was passive, as if he was forced to do it. But right now, he sounded as if he had found a goal for himself. Why did the same reply feel so different? Dazed, Faucon shook his head helplessly. He remembered a lot of things. He was equally ambitious when he was young. Roland took out the staff and gave it to him. This is yours. It was a great help. It's a gift for you. Faucon turned around and walked away while he said casually, if you think you owe me a favor, kill a few more giant spiders. This should be a quest, but why isn't there any notification? Thought Roland as he looked at Faucon's back. He returned to his cottage. After eating some of the bread he bought from Lakeview Tavern, he studied the mathematical models of the new spells again. Time flew when he was occupied. It seemed that only a moment had passed, but Roland was already ejected from the game. After he left the game cabin, he copied the video of his battle against the giant spider and uploaded it to the forum. Then, he wrote. Maybe mages cannot cast a spell as easily as warlocks can, or level up as conveniently as priests, but mages have their own advantages. We can analyze spells, modify them, and thereby create new spells. I've never raided in the game until yesterday, and I used full power in this vivid environment. It's just the derivative spell of level 1 inferior fireball, but it's already so powerful. What about the spells of second rings or better? What if our levels are higher? Personally speaking, I think that although mages are weak at the beginning, they will definitely dominate all spellcasters in the future. After writing that, he posted his thread. Soon, someone replied to it. More and more replies were posted. After he refreshed the thread, there were already 20 replies. You said that you were not a crazy bomber? This is unbelievable. How did you extract all your magic power and focus it on one spell? I am a mage, too, but I can only deploy about 30% of my magic power. Uncle Sam suspects that you own weapons of mass destruction. Please go with the FBI agents. This is unfair. I'm a LV2 warlock, and my inferior fireball can only penetrate through a seedling. By logic, the magic damage of warlocks should be much higher than that of mages of the same level. I'll delete my character and join as a mage. The sound and visual effects of this explosion are exciting. Roland, do you need fans who adore you? I'll friend you. Go away. You are not a real fan. Roland shook his head helplessly as the replies deviated from the subject. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. He accepted the call, and his friend Shuck's voice came over. Bro, come to my place. My cousin has joined the game, too. According to his description, he seems to have been born somewhere near Red Mountain Town. Alright, I'm on my way. Roland hung up the phone and rode his bike to the cold drink bar. In their booth, he saw a young man who was around 18 and looked somewhat similar to Shuck. Lying on the sofa in a great mood, Shuck introduced, This is my cousin, Beta. He has been studying hard since elementary school. My uncle never allowed him to play games, but now that the college entrance exam is over, he is set free. Brother Roland, hello. Beta greeted Roland with a smile.